always good to be talking to Paddy Upton. I must tell you a thing or two of why Paddy is so respected around the cricket world. First of all, Paddy, let's just check. You can hear me fine. That your freshly brewed coffee is still very good and not yet cold, and that you're enjoying it.
Yes, I can hear you fine. Wonderful to be here. Always nice to see you, Harsha. Pity we have to do it from the other side of the world rather than together around a cricket field somewhere in India or somewhere in the world.
Since we're both coffee lovers, there you go again, making me feel a little... My coffee is 2 rooms away and I can't go there for another 45 minutes, but doesn't matter. As you can see, Paddy and me know each other quite well, but I'll tell you why Paddy is respected in the world of cricket. It's because his career has grown and has widened. Sometimes we become better and better at the one thing we do, whereas Paddy's got better and better at different things as he's gone along. Paddy started as a physical conditioning coach, then became a mental conditioning coach. And as a lot of people will tell you, that mental side of the game was underrepresented. Not much was known about it because it's a human being who takes the field, not a physical specimen that takes the field. So Paddy became a mental conditioning coach and earned great renown for his work with the Indian cricket team, 2011. We loved him for that. He then went on to work with the South African team. We didn't like him too much for that. But that's all right. And then, of course, Paddy became a coach by himself. So that was another step up. But more than anything else, Paddy's knowledge within the game is much respected. But unlike a lot of people in our sport, his knowledge outside the game is also vast. So Paddy's a coach and a scholar, both. And that's why he's good to have in a Lit Fest, and he's good to have in a cricket conversation. We'll try and marry the two. We'll make it more Lit Fest conversation than cricket. So thank you very much for joining us, Paddy. And tell us a little bit where you are, because you are in a place that all of us love to go to. Though at the moment, it's a bit different.
Yeah, thanks very much for that very generous introduction. I really appreciate it, Harsha. Yeah, I'm in Cape Town at the moment, and we're in the middle of Cape Town winter. And one of the things that does happen in Cape Town winters is we get these storms that come out of literally the Antarctica, and they travel thousands of kilometers over the cold Arctic Ocean, and they hit us at the southernmost tip of Africa. And this weekend, we've actually got 2 back-to-back really typical violent Cape Town storms. They're actually going to collide with each other tomorrow evening. But today we've got incredible winds, downpour, and I live probably about 100 meters from the ocean. I walked down a little bit earlier, and the swells are 8 meters high that are crashing against the beaches and the rocks. So quite a wild, classic Cape Town winters weekend. And that's why I'm loving my homemade coffee so much.
In which case, let's get on with the conversation right away, because you don't know when some of those waves get a little closer. They'll stay their distance anyway. Right, Pat, I'm fascinated by your book, The Barefoot Coach, and the photograph you put on that book for a start, because you could have replaced a pair of jeans with a dhoti and you'd have been Indian, because we're used to walking around in a dhoti and bare feet most of the time anyway. But what I enjoyed was as much the anecdotes in the book, as much a learning from the book, as about the discussion of key aspects that go into the making of athletes. And we'll start with one. And for all those of you, I mean, if some of you don't follow cricket as well, some of you watching in, that's absolutely fine, because you'll find that these topics are true of your life as much as they are about cricket. And the first thing, and it's something I've experienced myself, I've had to embrace myself a few times too, is about failure. Because Paddy, you write 2 or 3 chapters on failure when a coach should be talking about success. And that is a bit intriguing, but everybody fails. So do elite athletes, don't they?
Yes. You know, we all taught, there's so many books on how to win, and there's not many books on how you should behave when you win. And there's quite a few athletes who actually don't behave very well when they do win, but there's very little written about how to lose. Now, in cricket, if you're a batsman, you're actually failing more often than you're succeeding. In T20 cricket as a bowler, you're probably failing more often than you're succeeding. As teams, you know, the best sports team in the last century is the New Zealand All Black rugby team. That's the best in the world. They have an average win ratio of 77%. So that means they're having to deal with failure literally 23% of the time. That's almost 1 in 4 games. So it's so important how to, number one, learn from failure as opposed to get upset and blame and or avoid it with a whole lot of alcohol that a lot of other teams do. So failure delivers a whole lot of learning, not only from a sports perspective, but also from a character perspective. And I guess I've been involved in some really heart-wrenching losses. I mean, there's 3 T20 tournaments I've been head coach of where we lost a game on the last ball of the last game of the entire tournament. And all 3 times we were set to qualify for the finals. And that last ball, once in the end of the IPL, after 14 games, we went from a potential final position and all the consequences of that for the owners and bonuses and the wonderful thing to not qualifying. And it is so heart-wrenching. And, you know, the first 1 or 2 of them, I didn't manage myself and therefore didn't manage the team as well as what we could have. And we didn't extract the value that was available in the learning because we're all in our reactive patterns. So failure teaches us a lot of lessons. There's not much written about, well, how do you extract those lessons?
One of the things that you and Gary Kirsten had to work about, and something we only learned much after the event, probably the biggest event for a lot of young Indians at the moment, was winning the 2011 World Cup. And you had to work with the side to ensure that they were not overawed by the occasion, because India doesn't allow you to sit in peace. So everywhere they went, people would have been telling them, but you have to win. And it's interesting, the great Wasim Akram told me the story about the 1999 World Cup final. They were a better side than Australia and they lost very badly. And he said, everybody from Pakistan was there. The senators, the industrialists, the film stars, the cricket fans. And suddenly in the morning, he said, I asked myself, but what if we lose? And that was something you grappled with well before the final started, didn't you?
Yes. So we knew our real 2011 World Cup campaign started about 13 months out from the actual event. In fact, it started in Sri Lanka during an Asia Cup final where India was actually preparing that morning to play against Sri Lanka in the Asia Cup final. Interestingly, that event was also a final against Sri Lanka. And the question Gary Kirsten asked was, if this was the World Cup final, are we ready? And I was sitting with Eric Simons, who's the bowling coach, Gary and myself at breakfast on the morning of this final. And the answer from all of us was, no, we are not ready. So that was really when the campaign began, was, okay, so what do we need to do to get this team ready? And there was a lot of research, a lot of stuff. And one of the key pieces that came out from my perspective as the mental conditioning coach was, up until that point, no host nation had ever won a World Cup at home. And part of the thinking behind that was, well, maybe we could only think it was because the pressure of playing in front of your home crowd is just so vast. And we extrapolated that. Well, can you imagine playing a final in India at the Wankhede Stadium in Sachin Tendulkar's last World Cup game? There cannot be any greater amount of pressure on any team than the Indian team playing a final in the Wankhede Stadium, Sachin's home stadium, in his last World Cup game. So we knew we needed to prepare for more pressure than possibly what had ever been on a team. And that was a 13-month journey to prepare the team to not succumb to that level of pressure.
And obviously the next question, how did you ensure that? Because you cannot package pressure and put it away in a corner in India. We breathe pressure. We are surrounded by pressure. You cannot suddenly get up one morning and say, you know what, gentlemen, from now on, we're going to treat pressure as that pariah. We're going to lock him out. We're not going to let him in. It will come in. So how do you ensure that they're aware of the pressure? But it's impossible not to be aware of it, and yet keep it at arm's length.
So a number of different ways. There's 2 key things that stand out. One was the long-term process from that moment of in Sri Lanka. Every single team meeting we had that had to do with strategy, we would use the language, when we play the final in Mumbai. And then Gary and I would have the rest of the conversation. And we wanted players to become so used to the idea of strategizing for a game with the concept that this could be the World Cup final in Mumbai. So by the time we had arrived there, and please remind me to share my World Cup pre-World Cup final speech. As the mental conditioning coach, I remember on that morning at Sri Lanka thinking, well, if we get to the final, I'm going to get this opportunity to stand up there as the mental conditioning coach and the motivator and deliver this inspiring, it makes me think of Al Pacino, any given Sunday speech, how I could fill a team with inspiration and motivation to go out there.
Gather your rosebuds while you may from Dead Poets Society.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. We wanted the players to have heard and literally mentally been through that moment of playing the idea of playing the World Cup final. And I would say 3-4 times a week in team meetings for 13 months, the players heard, when we play the final in Mumbai, it was never when we win, it's when we play it. Because we just needed to get there. Once we got there, what was going to happen was going to happen on the day. So that was one thing, is we conditioned their minds to be comfortable with the idea of it. And we spent 13 months doing that. The other big thing is, in the beginning of that tournament, we were talking about the idea of pressure. And we embraced the conversation as opposed to try and run away from it or pretend there wasn't any such thing. And one of the players came up with the idea of, but we've got the expectations of, and the number that players came up with is 500 million Indian fans on our shoulders. Probably 500 million because the other 500 million were too young and they weren't going to watch it. And we reframed that to, it's not the expectation. Don't think of it as the expectations of 500 million people on your shoulders when you walk out into the field. Let's think about it as 500 million people walking onto the field with you, holding your hand in support, as opposed to sitting on your shoulders. They're there with you and hold their hands and walk out onto the field with them. And that really seemed to capture the imagination, and it did. You could literally feel the pressure being relieved from their shoulders to having friends walking onto the field in support. And those are two things.
And yet, if from 13 months out, you're talking when we make the World Cup final, wouldn't somebody get up on the day of the quarterfinal and say, but what if you don't? We've been talking about this for 13 months. We're up against 3 times world champions up in front of us. What if we don't?
So in the lead up to the tournament, that was the language. Once we got into the tournament, there was no more talk of the final. There was just talk about it's going to be game by game. And the important thing there was, so that's important to know, we stopped that language by the time the World Cup arrived. Then the language became, we're going to take this one game at a time. And importantly, we're going to keep the pressure even across the entire tournament. So game 1 or 2 or 3 is no more or less important than the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals. We condition players to know we're going to prepare as best we can for each and every game. And I think one of the things that really helped decrease the pressure was losing a game, losing to South Africa, which took some of the pressure of needing to win. It's like, okay, now we've got the loss behind us and we realize that losing is okay. We had the tied game against England, and that also served as that's okay, guys. And we were actually completely all right. We knew we just needed to qualify. We didn't need to qualify in first place.
It's interesting. You want desperately to win. These are elite athletes. The reason they play is they want to win. They've been dreaming about the World Cup. How do you tell elite athletes that, of course, you want to win, but it's okay if you don't today? Because that's not in their DNA. I mean, as a television presenter, if you told me it's okay to have a bad day, I'd say no, because I'm carrying the telecast with me. So how do you tell elite athletes that?
Okay, so there's something in your language, Harsha, that is so important. They want to win desperately. So we do everything we can to set up for winning. So it's okay to lose, but it's not okay to not try. Those are two different things. If you give everything and the result against you, that's fine. What's important in the language is we want to win, but we don't need to win. And it's very subtle, but it's very important. So when we come up with the word need, I need to do well, I need to win, I need to get selected, I need to close this deal, I need to get this promotion, our brain goes into a very much a survival instinct. Now, what we need is we need air, because without air and breathing, we can last about 3, 4, 5 minutes and we die. The next thing we need is sleep. We can last about 7 days without sleep. The next thing we need is water. We can last 7 to 10 days without water. And the only other thing we need is food. The rest of the stuff is wants. So when we need to win, it creates too much pressure, too much adrenaline, and it sets us up for failure. But when we really want to win, then it means, yes, we want and we do everything we can, but if we don't, it was just a want. It's not a desperate need. And that was language. We were very clear. Yeah, we want to win, but guys, we don't need to win. No one dies if we lose. The sun will still come up over, the India Gate tomorrow morning.
And your relatives will still be your relatives. If you got a dog, he'll still come wagging his tail. It's a couple of things I wanted to tell you. One from my personal experience. There was the T20 World Cup it was then the World T20 in South Africa, Johannesburg. It's the start of something big. We don't know what it is. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of people who are going to be watching the start of the telecast. I'm hosting it. This is such a big day for me. And, really excited. And I'd already been a presenter for some years by now, but I'm very excited. Paddy, every single thing that could go wrong that day went wrong. Some of it was probably my fault. A lot of it wasn't, but it did go wrong. And I remember at the end of that, probably didn't see the first over because I had my face in my hands. Cut 2011 World Cup final. I'm hosting it out of a studio in Delhi. I'm having breakfast and I'm saying, wow, India World Cup final, home ground. Everyone's watching the telecast. And I said, no, it's game number 372 for you. You did 371 well, do 372 well. And exactly as you're saying, I just told myself, it's another game. And it's interesting, Nasser Hussain told me this afterwards, that elite athletes, and I experienced that happening to me, elite athletes know that it's a big day, but they've acquired the ability to pretend it isn't.
Yes.
And that must be tough. He gives the example of putting a 20-foot by 3-foot plank of wood on the floor and asking people to walk on it. And then says, put the same plank of wood. It's the same plank of wood you're walking on, but put it between two buildings 70 meters in the air. Can you still walk on it? So I'm fascinated. And the reason, a lot of you are wondering why I'm going on and on talking to Paddy about failing and getting it right, is because a lot of the times teams lose because they're afraid. And that is why you condition them. And that's why I'm fascinated by this discussion.
Yeah. So it's interesting you talk about senior players. Now, I've been working with the Sydney Thunder team. We had 3 really senior players in the team in the Australian Big Bash League, in Owen Morgan, Jacques Cullis, and Mike Hussey. The rest of the team was very young and inexperienced. And I was looking for ways, how do I bring this experience into these 3 guys' experience and transfer it to the youngsters? And so what I asked Hussey, Cullis, and Owen Morgan to do is to sit in a little circle, the 3 of them, and have a conversation about how they approached high pressure moments early on in their career. And then to have a conversation, how do they approach those same high pressure moments now towards the end of their career? And they were all senior campaigners. And I wanted the youngsters to hear the difference between what they did when they were young and what they did now, full of experience. And it was one of the most amazing conversations, how when they were young, the pressure was there. They so desperately wanted to do well and try their best, and they didn't sleep well at night, and they went out there and they were trying to force the issue. Yet when they were older, they were more relaxed. They realized it's just another game, but it is important. Try and relax, try and smile into it, and make sure you bring your A game and do your best. And there was a great contrast. And afterwards, I went to, in fact, it was Mike Hussey and Owen Morgan. I said, guys, that was fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing so openly in front of these youngsters. And I'm not sure which one of them it was, but they said, well, I wasn't actually entirely honest. In fact, it was Owen Morgan. He said, I wasn't entirely honest. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, actually, when I go out to bat now, particularly in a World Cup or big game, I say to myself when I'm walking out to bat, I really don't care. I really don't care. I really don't care what happens. And Mike Hussey laughed and he said, I do something so similar. I make the game in my head so unimportant. And it's just by decreasing the value, that actually naturally decreases the pressure. Because what pressure is, very simply, pressure arises from the amount of importance we place on a result. So the more important we make the result out to be in our own head, the more pressure. The less important, the less pressure. And you just think about public speaking or doing a big presentation. If it's to your family or the presentation doesn't matter, you're comfortable, you're natural, and things flow. But if there's a big audience and there's consequence, and maybe this is about signing an important deal or not, because it's so important for you, the pressure rises, and that undermines our effectiveness and our performance.
You know, it's interesting you talk about job interviews. A lot of people watching this program would be tense about going to job interviews, would be tense about that promotion interview. I'll share very quickly a short story of my first job interview. I always wanted to do advertising. And through my 2 years at India's leading business school, all I fantasized about was working in rediffusion advertising. That's the only job I ever wanted. And our advertising prof used to work in rediffusion. I badgered the daylights out of him. I must have made his living hell every time he came. And now there's a job interview. I go to the interview. I want it so badly, so badly. I'm almost like this going into the interview. It was a disaster. And half an hour later, I'm sitting in my room and saying, I blew it. And
Yes.
and the word to use, literally, I choked. And yeah. I got a call, or someone knocked at the door saying they want to meet you. So I said, yeah, okay, here I go. And he said, I'm giving you a job on the condition that you never, ever do such a bad interview again. What happened? And I said, I wanted it too badly. I wanted it so badly that I could not hear what they were saying. My mind was not processing what they were saying. I was so tense about getting it right. And I'm sure that happens to the best players going out to bat, or people with job interviews, or a project that they're handling. So I'm fascinated you want to say that. It's interesting. One other thing, and I want your opinion on that because you know both people very well. Rahul Dravid was quoted as recently as last week as saying about MS Dhoni. He said, sometimes I watched MS Dhoni in a run chase, and I got the feeling it didn't matter to him whether we were winning or losing. Well, that's a big thing to say.
So by not caring that much, it puts you in the best possible space to be able to succeed. Now, there is a key distinction here. There is the result, and there is the effort that you're putting in towards the result. If you're putting in your absolute best effort and you don't care about the result, that is the best place to be. So you using that interview example, if you walked into that interview and you really it didn't matter to you whether you got the job or not. It was irrelevant. You were just going and you were just going to have a conversation with somebody for a 45-minute interview. And if you got it, happy. If you didn't get it, happy. But you went in there and you prepared for the interview. You really listened, which we need to do in an interview. You were really eloquent. You were relaxed, and you shared openly and honestly. You would have knocked it out the park. So MS Dhoni, yes, he of course he wants to win. He does not cut any corners on the process. And what I want to allude to here is there are some people who go out there and say, okay, so Paddy says we mustn't care so much about the result. And what they do is that spills over into the performance, and they don't care about their performance. That's not acceptable. You must care about your performance, but not care about the result.
And this is something that Hindu philosophy talks about as well. So we in India know about this well, that you give it your best. Now, before I move on to the next topic,
I just want to stop there. If you go into the preachings of Islam, they do the same thing as well. If you go into Christianity, they talk to the same thing. Put your best effort and leave the results in God's hands. All the religions talk about focus on the process and leave the results to whoever is in charge of the result.
In fact, I'm Googling it as I speak to give you the exact translation. But that's taking us away from what we want to talk about. Before we go on to the next topic, I want to talk to you about, which is preparing for success, and some other fascinating things that you want to talk about. That speech you prepared for 13 months on the day before the final. How long was it?
So in my head, I was thinking this through. I'd lie in bed at night, trying to imagine what it is. And I even started.
How many times did you rehearse the speech to the fan?
A lot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Really, that was going to be my moments of glory. And I watched Any Given Sunday, and I watched Al Pacino's speech, and I was like, okay, what can I take from that? And by the time we got to the night before the final on, I think would have been, I forget the exact date, 1st of April, I think. When I got my chance to stand up after Gary had done his strategic conversation, there was time for me to speak, and then MS Dhoni would finish. And almost my exact words to the team, which is exactly how I felt. It was delivered in the same calm tone I'm going to deliver to you now. And it was something like, and it was as short as this: gentlemen, tomorrow is like a movie. We all know our part. We're all well rehearsed. We are ready. Tomorrow it's about going out and doing what we know to do, and the result will look after itself. I was that confident that we were prepared for the roles we were going to play, and it was just a case of, like actors, going out and delivering our performance. And
if anything, MS's speech must have been even shorter, but that's for for another day.
If you have a speech like that, it would count as a long speech.
You talk about preparing for success. And before we get there, a word for all of you. It might seem a slightly alien, difficult concept that you desperately want to win, but tell yourself that it doesn't matter. And I'm not a Tendulkar. I'm not a Callis. I'm not a Lara. I'm not a Vaughan, but it's worked for me. So if it works for me, there's no reason it can work for you. So it can work for simple people too. People like you and me. Preparing for success. One thing I've noticed, Paddy, with all the great players, with all the great achievers, because I saw great people in advertising. I saw through the corporate speaking programs we do, we meet a lot of interesting people. They have a routine. They're very good with time. They don't waste time like I do. They're not fooling around on WhatsApp or Twitter. They're very focused. This, and then this, and then this, and then this. And then I thought to myself, do I have a routine on a good day? And it turns out there is. But you worked with people in far more high pressure situations.
Yes. So very good question, that's Harsh. So what's really important is that an individual finds their own routine that works for them. Some people, the more meticulous A-type personalities, need a lot more structure, a lot more time, a lot more detailed routine. The more impulsive, spontaneous, creative types need a little bit less routine, because too much routine constricts their thinking. So it's important to find your own routine. And the routine needs to have a very good reason. One is preparing for the event. And part of the routine also needs to be relaxing and having time out. So I'll use a practical example is during that 2011 World Cup, we had about 4 to 5 days between each game, which in a cricket context is actually a very long time. Yes. Normally in bilateral or tri-series, you have 2 days between games. So you have a day to recover and decompress, a day to travel, and then maybe a day to get ready. So there's a nice rhythm and a routine. You have 1 day to really get ready. During the World Cup, you could be in the same venue, in the same hotel room. Because of the security restrictions, you're stuck in that hotel for 5 days. If you're in your routine and you're preparing and planning, and you're playing that game over and over in your head, what happens is you get mentally exhausted.
Yes.
So part of the routine is not just preparing for the event, but it's also very deliberately, once you're prepared, then to have downtime. So part of players' routines is, once I'm ready and I get on the bus, it might be just to listen to music and not think about the game. When they get to the ground, I mean, I remember players like Sehwag. Part of his preparation was to be joke and laugh and have fun. That's how he got himself comfortable in a good space. A lot of players listen to music. So routine is important, or your habits are important. They need to be yours, and they need to include chilling and relaxing. Once you're prepared, you need to get your mind off whatever it is. If you've got a big presentation or a job interview and you spend 4 days doing the job interview over and over and over and over again, you will end up walking to the job interview mentally exhausted.
Sehwag even sang while he was batting, didn't he? Sometimes we picked it up on the stump mic. He even sang when he was batting, but he was a character. I mean, you've got to handle people like Sehwag, and you've got to handle people like Gambhir. And imagine the two of them actually opened the batting together for so much, close friends, and yet as unlike each other as possible. And yet and yet both have to have their own routine that doesn't clash.
Yeah, I mean, just on that music, it's it's one of the most underutilized tools of becoming present and relaxing the mind. A lot of golfers, if you want to be fully present, and we're told that you want to be present or very mindful of in the moment when there's an important event, like standing over a dressing golf ball, or the bowler's running up to bowl, or as a bowler, you're running into bowl. You don't want to have your mind too busy. You want to just calm and relax. And one of the best ways to do it is actually to sing. And if you sing to yourself, you can't be thinking. Just try it yourself now or even a bit later. Try and think and plan. No, not yourself, maybe the listeners, because this conversation. But try and think and plan and sing at the same time. So thinking is a very valuable asset to get yourself present and calm, as is listening to music. And almost every single athlete on the team bus on the way to the ground and in the change room before going out to play during the warm-up, they've got the earphones in and they're listening to music.
Yeah. One of the strategies, though, all those years ago when I played an inter-college final, it was huge for us in the city, inter-college final. And one of our guys says, I've got the perfect strategy. We send Harsha to the opposition dressing room and make him sing there. And they'll tear their hair off. But you talked about the little things was very important. I used to be, Paddy, a very, very nervous presenter. I still am many times. I need that 30 seconds to get in rhythm and say, okay, I'm all right. And my producer and me had worked out, he'd tell me in my ear, just as the music is playing and you're getting ready, our code word was breathe.
Yes. Because
I would be, hello and welcome. And he'd say, breathe. And I would literally go like that. That was our code word, breathe. Because when you're tense, you don't breathe. So I fluffed my interview because really I wasn't breathing. And so when I became a presenter, that was our key word. Me and Michael O'Dwyer, I don't know if you know Mark, our key word was breathe. And I was very lucky to work with very good producers thereafter with whom I established this pattern. You talk in your book, Paddy, about the need to be a good person. And I thought, I said, Paddy must be right. You must write a book on spirituality because you get all kinds in our sport. You get the devious, you get the cruel, you get the kind, you get the genuine team players, you get all kinds. And if you look at the list of successful people, that encompasses all kinds too. So what's this about being a good person?
So that's a very good question. You know, that was one of the 4 goals that Gary, Kirsten, and I had privately written down in the airplane flying over to India to take over the job for the first time. We had 4 goals. One was to take India to the #1 test team in the world, a position they hadn't been. To win the World Cup, we knew to do that, we needed to create a happy team environment. And the 4th one was to help the players to become better people. We never shared the 4th goal with anybody until well after our 3-year tenure with the team. Interestingly, if we take a step to the left and we look at it, I mentioned earlier, the New Zealand All Blacks, the most successful team, sports team in the last century, and more recently, without their win ratio is over 80%. One of the New Zealand rugby team's mantras, and this is the most successful team in the world, is better people make better All Blacks. So there must be something in it. And for me, you know, in doing the mental conditioning coaching that I've done over, you know, I've been doing it for 20 years now. And probably one of the single most important things that I learned was the more secure an individual is within who they are as a person, separate from being a cricketer or a footballer or an athlete, that the more secure that they were within themselves, that Paddy Upton is within himself, and that I know what my strengths are, I know what my values are, I know who I am, and whether I succeed or I fail, it doesn't change my identity. When someone has those deep roots as a human being, separate from being an athlete, they don't have nearly as much fear. They don't have fear of failure. Because fear of failure is an ego thing. What will I look like in other people's eyes if I fail? Where someone is secure within themselves, no, I might fail and I might succeed. And whether I fail doesn't make me worse or lesser person. If I succeed, it doesn't make me a better person. 2 of the biggest mental obstacles to success in sports and possibly in life is, one is fear of failure. The more secure within yourself, you don't fear failure. You know it's just part of it. So you don't succumb to fear of failure. And the other one is pressure. And as I said earlier, pressure comes from the amount of importance we place in the result. And why do we make a result important? Because in somewhere in our ego, we think, if I get that result, I do well, I will look good, I will feel good, and I'll be judged to be more or better in other people's eyes. Where someone who's really secure within themselves, Rahul Dravid is a real icon for me in that regard, a Hashim Amla. Whether the team won or lost, whether they got runs or not, it didn't impact who they were as human beings and how they felt about themselves. So they didn't need constant mental conditioning coaching. They just needed to ground themselves in being as good a person as I can be. And when you're secure within yourself, you can enter a big moment knowing I've done all my preparation. I'm going to be the best I can be. And I know I'm not tomorrow. Today, I'm the best I can be. Tomorrow, I'll be better. I can work on something and be more skilled and more knowledgeable. But today, I'm okay with who I am. And if I win or I lose, I'm still okay with who I am. I'm not more or less. And that's what I mean by number one. And the other things is when I talk about happy team, a good person has values that serve other people or a greater cause, something greater than themselves, ahead of their own selfish needs. And when you have somebody like that in a team environment, and you've got the majority of the team like that, you have got a team who are working together as a team, which is something that Gary and I worked hard with the Indian cricket team, is create that environment where people really celebrated each other's success and thought about others at least as much as they thought about themselves.
If a lot of you are wondering why these two people who get to see great cricket matches are talking about these kind of things, it's remember the guy who goes out to bat, or the spinner or the bowler who's bowling the last over of a T20 game or a test match, is the same human being that you are in your profession as well. It's just that he's performing in front of many more people. You're performing maybe in front of fewer people, but it's the person who goes out to play. And that's why in our sports and everything, we talk about understanding the whole person. Some people like pressure, some people don't. One of the things that Paddy and Gary did around that 2011 Indian team was to bring one of the most daredevil explorers in the world to work with the Indian team for a week or so. And that was Mike Horn. We could go on and on about what Mike Horn did. He's an explorer who's faced death many times. He's gone around the Arctic. He's climbed mountains without oxygen. But there's just one thing I wanted to bring out among the many things, because we got, another 10, 12 minutes. He said, imagine and visualize. He said he always visualized himself there, where he was going to be. He always imagined, and he said when he climbed the peak at 8,000 meters, he'd already been there before. I mean, the stories of his bravery are, we could talk about that for 2 hours, but this is the one thing that I pulled out. He talked about the will to win being greater than the fear to lose. We've talked about that a little bit, but also about imagining and visualizing. And that's something a lot of great players have told me. And I've noticed that with presentations as well. I like to go to a venue that I'm presenting and just look at the venue. Even though I'm not playing, I go to the center of a game before and I just look around and imagine what it must be like, even though I'm not actually playing. But for the people actually playing, this is a big part of their preparation, isn't it?
Yes. So again, you're talking into the concept of visualization, which is certainly not something new in the world of sports psychology. The reality is there's some people who that really is their learning preference to visualize. Other people, it's not necessarily their learning preference, and they struggle to project themselves into the future, into that position, to feel the feeling and smell the smells and be there. So for some people, visualization really works. For others, it works a bit less. But what is important is that we imagine ourselves succeeding, and then we use that experience to go, okay, so what are all the things I need to do to set up the best chance of succeeding, which feeds into my planning and the kind of habits and the things I need to do to prepare for success. But it would be naive to say, only think about success. Mike Horn also thought about what are all the things that might go wrong.
Correct.
You don't attach yourself and you don't dwell on that too much, but you look at all the things that can go wrong and you say, right, what are all the contingencies that I need to put in place to prevent that happening? So when I go into the environment, I'm chasing success, but I'm also prepared for the things that might go wrong. And when we're prepared for success and for failure, it frees us up to be able to relax into the moment, knowing I have done my homework. And that's one of the language Gary and I used a lot with the Indian team is, and everyone would recognize it. I mean, I wonder how many people listening in, there's 170 odd people listening in, how many of you know what it feels like to walk into an exam maybe at university, at school or college, having studied the entire book, the entire curriculum. Because when you do walk into an exam having studied the whole book, you're in the best possible mental space compared to, I guess most of us know what it feels like to walk into an exam having cribbed or cut corners. What does that feel like for you? And just come, I mean, it would be interesting to type into the chat there. What does it feel like when you go in having cut corners and not fully prepared? What are kind of the words come up there?
I'll tell you what happened to me.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, in preparing for an important moment, prepare for success, prepare for failure, the better prepared you are, the more you've studied the book for that particular exam, the more you can go in with confidence and the more you set up for success.
Yeah. And when I cut corners, it's amazing how it happened to me when I'm preparing for an exam. There's always that one chapter you say, okay, I don't have time. And that is where the question comes from. And our next talking point is about a certain category of people. I found that part of the book fascinating. It's only 2 pages in the book, but I found it fascinating because a lot of you have met these people. All the people, all of you who are watching this program have met the people we're going to talk about. And these are the psychopaths. I remember when I first talked to Paddy about psychopaths, I'd gone to drop him back to the hotel after we'd done something. And Paddy, all that I was thinking about on the way back to my office after I dropped you off was psychopaths. I said, never thought about psychopaths in the world of sports, psychopaths in the world of business. I'm going to take the liberty. There, I've got that. I'm going to read a chapter that's at the bottom, read a few lines. I've seen the so-called attributes of mental toughness in psychopaths, which help deliver results on the field. I've seen how fans, friends, and the media adore these people. I've also seen what it looks like when their mental toughness is unmasked as psychopathic behavior. They come across as being narcissistic, self-serving, compulsive liars, manipulators, without any remorse and an inability to take responsibility for their errors. And yet, they're also very charming people who can, I mean, they're people you look at them and say, I want to like them. So yes. It's a strange breed of people that you've seen on the sports field, but I'm sure they exist in the corporate world among lawyers, doctors, politicians, everywhere. Psychopaths, it's almost a daunting word in itself.
It is a daunting word. In fact, so much so that I did have a chapter in the book on psychopaths, and my publisher said, this is a little bit too heavy.
It might get serialized. It might get serialized on Netflix.
So I was actually asked to leave that chapter out. But, you described psychopaths there. They're highly functioning individuals who are far more clever, far more strategic, cunning than you and I will ever be. Someone like Donald Trump ranks very highly on the psychopath scale. I mean, that's been documented. Hillary Clinton did, Adolf Hitler did. They're highly functioning individuals. And in fact, research suggests that 1 in 100 people is born a psychopath. In corporate America, that same research suggests 1 in 20 senior business leaders are psychopaths. And in some industries, they think as many as 1 in 5 people are psychopaths. And those industries, interestingly enough, Harsh, one of them is in the media, in the legal fraternity, in the financial fraternity, in IT, and amongst surgeons tend to be very psychopathic. And if they are so successful because they are strategic, they are highly talented, they're cunning, they don't succumb to mental pressure. In fact, they actually thrive under pressure and in chaos because they don't have any wiring to empathy whatsoever. They have complete control over their emotions. They're able to exploit weaknesses in other people and see them. So by extrapolation, they would definitely exist in the sports world. The world's greatest possible example is Lance Armstrong, how he lied, how he cheated, how he manipulated. As long as he did, he believed in his own lies, and he was only uncovered much, much later and so far down the line. They do exist. You and I do know them. And from a distance, we will never know that. We're just absolutely in love with them. But when you work at very close quarters, which I have done, it is soul destroying how they can break down individuals, break down organizations. In fact, they break down industries. The 2008 global credit crunch was architected by psychopaths in the financial institutions who really didn't care. They knew what they were doing. They built their empires and they didn't care how many people or pensions they were destroying.
My last question for you is in the last stage of your career, which was actually as a coach. And we have one thing in common, you and me, Paddy, in that we get asked the question, how much cricket have you played? How easy was it to get the trust of people when you're a coach and you haven't physically been in the same situation that they have been? So was it difficult to get that trust? How do you go about acquiring that trust?
So there's two, a very, very good question, Harsh. And there's two answers to that question. One is my approach to coaching is one where I honestly believe, and particularly in the modern day, that the cricket expertise sits within the playing group. So when I walk into a room as a head coach, and friends of mine who know me well, who know I don't actually know enough about cricket to be leading some of the players that I've led, they say to me, isn't it daunting to walk into a debrief and you've got Rahul Dravids and Shane Watsons and Steve Smiths in the room, and now you've got to present as head coach to these guys who actually, Paddy, they know more about cricket than you. Isn't it daunting? And my answer is no. It's not daunting because I don't walk in thinking that I need to have the answers and the expertise. I walk in with questions looking to harness the expertise that sits in the playing group. So I don't pretend to be an expert. So there is no real threat. And the players know that I don't stand up there and pretend to be an expert, number one. And number two, I guess my credibility as head coach started, my first ever head coach job was in 2013 with the Rajasthan Royals team. And Rahul Dravid was the captain at the time. And Rahul, he endorsed me to the players. So when a senior player like that gives you the endorsement, says, I want Paddy here and trust Paddy. He's not necessarily a cricket expert, but he has a very different expertise, which is in coaching. So I got automatic buy-in because someone like Rahul, who was such a senior statesman, said, I buy into this guy. Listen to him. He's got a very different approach. Give it a chance.
You know, when you and Gary first came across, I chatted a lot with Gary. I like Gary's soothing, calm nature. And he said to me something very interesting. He said he walked up to Tendulkar. Now, remember that Tendulkar's playing international cricket before Gary started playing international cricket. And Gary's retired, Tendulkar's still playing. Gary's come back as coach. That's a span of Tendulkar, an international cricketer. And Gary said he went up to him and said, what do you expect from me? And he said, I want a friend. And it just told me that even the high pressure players are looking for simple things like this. And that determined what his coaching style was. He once told me that you can scream and shout and rant and instruct people, and then you go with tomorrow and the people under you have not grown. Yeah. And I found that very interesting. Far too many CEOs, far too many leaders pretend they're in the army and they're taking their team along with them and say, march, and then you march, and then they say, pick up your weapons, and you pick up your weapons. So I thought that was interesting, that when the leader goes away, he's left nothing behind, or she's left nothing behind.
So when you have power, you need to diminish the power of other people. You need to have power over people, and you walk away, your power disappears. When you come in with influence and you share and you grow other people, when you walk away, your influence actually grows. And if I could just have a little chew on a bone that is one of the bones that I've chewed throughout my career, and that is of the old school, authoritarian, hierarchical, my way or the highway, dictatorial leadership style that we see in sport, where the coaches are all knowing and dictates for people what to do. And in the Indian corporate environment, that's very prevalent still, that very paternal, hierarchical leadership style. It is not relevant for the current modern era. It worked yesterday when the leader got to that position because they knew more than anyone else and they needed to tell people what to do. So it was a content-based leadership. Today we live in the knowledge era. There's no way that you can be the content expert in anything because all information is out there, freely available to everybody on the internet. So we're now leading in a knowledge-based environment, which I mentioned earlier. That's my coaching approach that didn't get very much resistance because people have the opportunity to go and access information and knowledge for themselves. So leaders need to walk amongst their people. They need to empower them, and actually they need to serve their learning and growth as opposed to dictate and direct what they need to do. That's dysfunctional, disempowering leadership of yesterday. That still there's too much of that around today. And in tomorrow's leadership, and as we move forward in this post-COVID world where now people are sitting at home and we can't directly instruct them, it's really not going to work. We need to empower people rather than dictate to them.
The worst leaders I've met are those that said, we won because of me and we lost because of you. So it's fascinating, Paddy. We've got time for a few more questions, I think. So maybe we can get the moderator in to get those questions. But I hope you realize why we spend so much time talking about the mind of an athlete, because it's the mind that determines what the body does very often. And in recent times, Virat Kohli has talked about that himself a great deal, about how he's chiseled his body, but how his mind has become different. So happy to take questions if there's any chat room.
Yeah, Harsha, if you could just pull up the Q&A. I think we have around 20 odd questions. If you want to give it a quick scan, maybe we can take 4 at the most. I don't see us being able to do more than that.
Do you want me to pick the first one? What do you want to do?
Sure, go for it, and I'll queue up some of the others.
Okay, Paddy, your mental strength.
Good luck with picking questions from here, because there's some very, very good questions. I'm reading through them.
Paddy, if you're seeing it, are there things that you want to pick and respond to?
Go right ahead.
That makes it easier.
I'm going to leave the pressure on Harsha. Why should I take it on myself?
No, but a lot of them, I'm looking at Gaurav Chadda saying, how when conditioning do you balance between paranoia, failure, confidence of winning, views on cricketing outfits around the world? Some countries have a stellar list in their team, but crumble like cookies in testing situations, as Sachdev Ramakrishna. I think we'll take that because Paddy, the 2 teams that you worked with the most, India and South Africa, and you were part of a team that won after 1983, won 2011. You've also been part of a team, and I remember Gary telling me this once. He said, I look at this team, it's full of stellar people, and on the big day, they haven't won enough. And that, of course, is South Africa. And that's always blown my mind. And I wondered whether they wanted to win too strong, too badly, whether too intense.
Yes. So you're referring particularly to the South African team and choking.
In this case, yes. With no disrespect. It's something that happens to all of us. It's happened to me. Yeah.
So, I mean, listen, we've been, having worked with South Africa, really trying to figure out what is this choking thing? Is it just a label that's been hung around the player's neck that doesn't really fit? Because the reality is a lot of teams that haven't won World Cups, but South Africa's probably is a team that should have won, but under-delivered. And my short explanation for the choking is what we've already spoken about. There's 2 reasons. South Africa they're now too desperate to prove to themselves in the world that they can actually get through and they can win World Cup matches. So 1, there's the desperation. It's too important, which creates the pressure. Number 1. And number 2, they want to do it for themselves, to prove to themselves that they're good enough. And when we go into a really high pressure situation and it becomes about ourselves, the ego starts kicking in and the ego is very fragile. If I were to take a step to the left and we spoke about Mike Horn, these extreme adventurers, one of the reasons they're able to go way beyond what most human beings would ever be able to tolerate, and Mike Horn certainly is probably one of the most extreme adventurers ever. All of them do it for a cause greater than themselves. So when things get really difficult, really tough, and Mike Horn doesn't feel like climbing out of his tent in the Antarctic when the wind is blowing at 140 kilometers an hour and it's minus 40 degrees and he's got to tow a 150 kilogram sled by himself across ice. Who the hell wants to get out of your tent and go into those conditions and do something like that? Nobody. But Mike does it because he's got a cause greater than himself that he's wanting to serve. So it's not about him wanting to stay in his tent and stay warm. He's out there doing something for someone else. And I don't think the South African team have got that higher cause. They want to do it for themselves. And yet, Indian team, going into 2011 World Cup, we were doing it for for India, for the Indian population. We're doing it for the fans, and a lot of players were doing it for Sachin Tendulkar. So they were plugged into a cause greater than themselves.
And it needs to be said that South African team for a long time was the best sporting outfit in the world, that South African cricket team. I'm going to look at another question. This is Prakash Hariharan saying, the top two mental strengths and the two areas of weaknesses that you find in people and that you might have worked on.
So I've already mentioned, I think the two biggest mental obstacles as opposed to weaknesses is fear and pressure. And probably the biggest mental strength is self-esteem. Being okay with who you are as a person. Number one. And number two is not, the other mental strength is knowing that there is no such thing as mental strength. Feeling vulnerable, feeling scared, feeling insecure is perfectly normal, and to be able to embrace that and accept that. And that talks into, it's been much publicized, the comments I made about Gautam Gambhir being somewhat insecure as an individual. When he got the International Test Cricketer of the Year trophy in his first interview, he said, this does nothing to change the insecurity I have within myself. But what Gautam's strength was, is he didn't fight his insecurity. He went out and he focused on the task despite feeling insecure. I certainly, as a mental conditioning coach, I have vulnerabilities, I have insecurities, I have doubts, and I have fears. But I don't try and hide them. I just accept them and I keep focusing on what I need to do. Which talks, and I saw one of the questions here was about the difference between optimists and pessimists.
Yeah.
And there is an optimism and pessimism continuum that all humans fit along. On the one side, let's say it's extreme pessimist, looking at everything that can go wrong. On the other side is extreme optimists, and they only ever see things that can go right. Most of us fit somewhere along the spectrum. And in fact, research suggests that more than half the population actually sits on the pessimistic side of the continuum, meaning you naturally see things that can go wrong as opposed to naturally see the things that can go right. That is perfectly normal. That is perfectly healthy. That's perfectly okay. The problem with being a pessimist is so many of the motivational speakers and the mental conditioning coach and the self-help books say, you have to be positive. You have to think positive. You've got to say positive affirmations. You've got to look at the glass half full. That works for optimists. It does not work for pessimists. It's not natural. And what I say to pessimists is, be pessimistic. Look at what can go wrong. That's okay. In fact, there's a great saying that optimists invented the airplane, pessimists invented the parachute. Both of them have their role. So if you don't naturally think positive all the time, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Gautam Gambhir didn't think positively very much at all. He looked at everything that could go wrong, but we said, okay, so let's put things in place to overcome those things. And when you go out to bat, you might still feel pessimistic, but try your best. He went on to be the International Test Cricketer of the Year, and he went on to be the unsung hero of the 2011 World Cup final. He was the rock, the anchor that held the innings together for the majority of the time while India lost Sehwag, and then they lost Tendulkar, and then allowed Dhoni to build his innings. Gambhir was there the whole time, being the rock to put that together. But he wasn't full of confidence and bravado while he was doing that. He was just scrapping away. So that's a long answer, but mental strength isn't the absence of fear and vulnerability and insecurity. That's a myth.
I'm just looking at all the questions, and I think I owe all of you an apology because I think I asked too many myself and didn't leave enough time for a lot of your questions. I think we might have run out of time, or do we have time to take one more?
Yeah, we can take one, maybe two at the most.
Okay, two.
Yeah.
Let's go. Here's my Q&A. I'm enjoying being this tech savvy. Paddy 2011 about Yuvraj's illness. Here's an interesting one. Shane Warne famously downplayed the role of a coach, often mocking John Buchanan. How does a mental conditioning coach make a difference to an all-conquering team? Say the Aussies of the 2000s or the West Indies of the 80s. It's interesting too, Paddy, that the players like Shane Warne, who was so driven, didn't feel the need. And yet I met a lot of those Australian players who say that someone like John made a difference to their life, because there's different kinds of players in a team, isn't there?
Yes. So when you've got a great team, you don't need a whole lot of technical or strategic coaching. So certainly that Australian team under John Buchanan around the Warne Wars, McGrath, etc., Hayden,
Ponting, Gilchrist, everybody.
They didn't need technical, tactical, or strategic input. but you still need someone to keep it together and grow these individuals. One of the best quotes that I came across, stories I came across, which for me describes what I believe coaching to be. I believe coaching to be growing human beings for a lifetime of success, not only on the field, but off the field. And it was actually a coach by the name of Amos Stagg. And someone said to him, his team did really well. It was in America. And someone said to him in the interview afterwards, so do you think you've done really well as a coach, that this team of fairly underdogs have done well? And he said, I can't answer that. I can tell you in 20 years' time, when I see what kind of individuals these kids have turned out to be, only then will I know what kind of a job I did as a coach. Yeah. And our job as coaches and leaders is to build people, not just to drive short-term success. Like Darren Lehman had the Australian team 2 years ago so focused on short-term success that it became okay for a senior player to coerce a young player in Cameron Bancroft to take a piece of sandpaper on the field to go and sandpaper a ball in order to win at all costs. That is coaching for an immediate short-term result, which I don't buy into at all. As coaches and as leaders, we need to be building people, particularly if we're coaching younger people. We need to be building them for long-term success in all of life, not just to win a cricket or sports tournament at the end of the season. I'm not that coach at all. I don't buy into that win at all costs.
I'm glad to hear that. It's interesting too for the person who asked that question. In my best years as a presenter, I had a producer who couldn't face the camera to save his life, and yet made me thrice the person I was, simply by showing me what I was capable of, because I was a pessimist. I didn't believe. And so I can see where you're coming from completely, Paddy, from my life. And the reason I keep bringing up my story is not to say, look what a great guy I am, but to tell all of you who are like me that these things are good for you as well. We've gone past the Shane.
I'm going to follow the answer to my last question from...
Sure.
There was a question here. I just need to scroll back to see you answered around the man-catting incident that often gets brought up.
Yes.
I just want to acknowledge who's answered that question, asked that question. I can't see it now. My apologies.
Prashant Paul.
Prashant. Okay. Prashant, thank you for that. Okay. When I speak about creating a team of good people and doing things right. So the man-catting, for me personally, it's using what's within the laws of the game.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, sorry, I was just checking the It's the teams that I coach. I personally don't believe in the kind of team environment we create is one where we're not going to go and artificially manipulate a ball to reverse swing. Yes, that might help us win, but is that the kind of human beings we want to be? Man-catting, yes, it's something that you can do within the laws of the game. Did we at the time as a Rajasthan Royals team, we did consider that kind of thing? Do we want to do that kind of thing in the pursuit of winning? Or do we want to present ourselves in a certain way, in a certain team, in a certain brand, and not do those kind of things? We asked, do we want to be a team who sledges and verbally abuses the opponents? No, I don't believe in that. I don't think that serves... It says something about a character of an individual if they're prepared to abuse another human being in order to distract them in one moment to lose their wicket. Do we want to be that kind of person? And the answer is, the teams that I like to put together is no. We won't verbally abuse. We won't use sandpaper and cricket balls. And we choose not to be those guys who man-cad an opposing batsman. If he's stealing ground, we'll talk to him. We choose not to be those kind of individuals. And if other people choose to do that, David Warner wants to verbally abuse people. He wants to coerce a youngster to sandpaper a ball. If Ashwin wants to man-cad, that's absolutely fine. That's their choice, but it also is a reflection of their character. And that's a choice. I'm not going to judge that, but others will judge that. And those people beyond cricket, we gain reputations, and do you want to be known as a David Warner type? Mike Hussey never scored as many runs as David Warner. but who would you want to do business with in the long term? These guys finish playing cricket at the age of 35, 36. Would you like to go into business with David Warner or with Mike Hussey or with Rahul Dravid? Choice is yours. And how we behave, we will be judged into the long term around that. That's why I believe being a good person is really important, because it sets us up for success in all of life.
We should call it a wrap on this one, Harsha, Paddy. Thank you so very much.
Pleasure.
Absolute delight for the Bangalore Festival to have you on World Lit. And I think the conversations I see that people have taken away are just much more than cricket and literature, really a lot more about life. So thank you so much for that. We hope to see you on another platform again soon. Thanks to our lovely audience as well, and we'll keep this going.